You know what's genuinely hard to sit with? The moment you realize that the thing that you thought made you a good woman, the thing that people praised you for, the thing that you were proud of, might actually be the thing that's been slowly destroying you. That what you called love was actually hypervigilance. That what you called loyalty was self abandonment. That what you called being supportive was slowly disappearing inside someone else's life until you couldn't find yourself anymore. And before anyone panics, I'm not about to tell you that caring about people is the problem. I am not going to tell you to stop loving people or stop being generous or stop being the kind of person who shows up for others. What I'm going to tell you is that a lot of women were taught by their families, by their culture, by every message they absorbed growing up, that love means anticipating everyone else's needs, managing everyone else's emotions, keeping the peace, fixing problems, absorbing tension, shrinking yourself, and carrying the whole weight of a relationship entirely on your back. And somewhere in all of that, they stopped existing as a full person too. That's what we're talking about today. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Pattern Breakers Collective, the podcast where we dig into the patterns that shaped us, survived us, and that we are actively working to break. Before we start, as always, when I talk about harmful relationship dynamics, I'll use he for the person causing harm. That reflects my own experience and the work I do professionally, but codependency and the abuse that can exploit it exists across all genders and relationship types. If your story looks different from what I'm describing, this is still your episode. Now, today's episode came out of a webinar that I recently sat in on codependency by licensed professional counselor Nancy Johnston, who has spent over 40 years working in this space. And I sat through that training and something kept hitting me over and over again. The patterns she was describing, the loss of self, the overfunctioning, the external focus, the emotional suppression, these are not just patterns that show up in the general population. They are the exact patterns that narcissistic abuse actively cultivates and exploits deliberately, systematically over time. So today, I want to take what I learned from that training and bring it into the specific context of this audience. Women who have been in relationships where those codependent patterns were not just formed in childhood, they were weaponized in their adult relationships by someone who knew exactly how to use them. We're going to cover what codependency actually is, how it forms, what it looks like in real life, and the specific connection to narcissistic abuse, and most importantly, practical, concrete things that you can start doing to find your way back to yourself. Let's go. I have a complicated relationship with the word codependency, and I think a lot of people do, for good reason. Because online, it has been flattened into basically meaning, well, she loves too hard, or she's just attracted to toxic people, or she cares too much. And that framing is not only unhelpful, it is actively harmful because it puts the problem entirely on the woman and strips out every bit of the complexity of how these patterns actually form. So let me give you a definition I think is actually useful, one that came out of this clinical training I attended. Codependency, at its most practical level, is overfunctioning in someone else's life while simultaneously underfunctioning in your own. That's it. That's the core of it. And I love that framing because it's behavioral. It's not a label that says something is fundamentally wrong with you. It describes a pattern, a way of operating, something that can be observed, understood, and crucially, changed. When you are over-functioning for someone else, you are doing emotional labor, practical labor, or psychological work that they should be doing for themselves. You are carrying accountability that isn't yours to carry. You are managing their life while yours sits on the back burner. And when you are under-functioning in your own life, which is the other side of the same coin, that looks like neglecting your own health, your own friendships, your own finances, and your own dreams. Failing to consider yourself in your own decisions. Not making time for your own appointments while making sure everyone else's are handled. Being so consumed with another person's world that there is almost nothing left for yours. Now, here's something really important that I want to say before we go anywhere else. The behaviors that show up in codependency, giving, helping, caregiving, being flexible, being accommodating, are not inherently bad. In fact, in the right doses, they are genuinely good. They are qualities that make someone a caring partner, a present parent, a loyal friend. The issue is not the behavior. The issue is how far down the line it travels. Clinical literature always talks about thinking about these behaviors on a continuum. At one end, they're healthy and appropriate. You are giving with your actual resources, you are helping without losing yourself, you are caring for others while also caring for yourself. But at the far end of that continuum, those same behaviors become something else entirely. The giving goes beyond what you actually have to give. The helping crosses into doing things for people that they could do for themselves. The caring becomes a form of control, because if I can just fix everything for you, maybe I can keep everything from falling apart. The question is never, should I care about people? The question is, am I caring for others at the expense of my own existence? Is my emotional stability completely dependent on whether everyone else is okay? Because if it is, that is a very painful and unsustainable way to live. Before we talk about how these patterns form individually, I need to name something structural, because I think women often walk around thinking that this is some personal failing, some individual weakness, when actually the soil that they are standing in was prepared long before they had any say in the matter. Women are socially rewarded for self-sacrifice, constantly, consistently, across cultures and generations. The woman who sacrifices everything for her family is praised. The woman who keeps the marriage together no matter what it costs her is admired. The woman who manages the emotional temperature of an entire household while also managing her job and the kids' schedules and everyone's appointments, she gets called strong. She gets called the glue. She gets called inspiring. Meanwhile, her own needs have been sitting at the bottom of the list so long that she's forgotten they're there. We literally conditioned women to disappear into caregiving. We trained them to define their worth by how useful they could be to everyone around them. And then we act confused when they lose themselves. And the messages women receive that reinforce this don't only come from relationships. They come from religion. Be selfless, be humble, serve others. They come from culture. A good woman puts her family first. They come from the media. Love looks like sacrifice. From their own mothers who absorb the same messages and pass them on without even knowing that they were doing it. The clinical term for one of the core features of codependency is external focus. It means your attention, your energy, your emotional resources are organized around what other people need, what other people think, what other people feel, rather than around what is true for you internally. And external focus doesn't come from nowhere. Research on codependency has identified it as the dominant feature, present in almost every definition that's been studied. And it makes complete sense when you consider how many women grew up being praised for reading rooms, managing moods, and anticipating needs, while being actively discouraged from centering their own experience. If you grew up in a house where you felt like what you needed was consistently less important than keeping everyone else regulated, you learned external focus as a survival skill. It was adaptive. It was smart. It protected you. The problem is that it doesn't stop being automatic just because the original environment changes. Women were not born codependent. They were trained to be codependent by families, by culture, by every system that taught them that their value came from what they could do for everyone else. Understanding that is not an excuse. It is the starting point for actually changing it. So we need to know, though, how does this actually happen? How does someone end up here? The clinical framework that I find most helpful looks at 3 layers of influence. Think of them as concentric circles, each one wrapping around the one inside it. The innermost layer is the one of who you are. Some people come into the world with tendencies toward empathy, sensitivity, and care. They pick up on others' emotions easily. They care deeply. They are attuned. These are not flaws. They are genuine strengths. But they can also make someone more susceptible to developing codependent patterns because when you feel what other people feel very easily, it is hard to let them struggle without trying to fix it. The second layer, the second circle, is your family system. This is the biggest one for most people. Think about what love felt like in your house growing up. Was it reliable? Was it consistent? Did it feel secure, like it was going to be there regardless of whether you behaved correctly or made someone happy? Or was it conditional? Did love feel like something that had to be earned? Did you learn early that the way to stay safe was to read the room, manage the energy, keep things calm? Did you have to become the responsible one, the peacekeeper, the one who took care of everyone else so that everything didn't fall apart? A lot of women who struggle with codependent patterns were parentified as children, meaning that they took on adult emotional responsibilities before they were anywhere near developmentally ready for them. They were praised for being mature, they were relied on, and they learned being needed is the same as being loved. That belief, being needed equals being loved, is one of the most painful and powerful roots of codependency because it means that you can never stop over-functioning. If you stop making yourself useful, you become afraid of losing the love. Family roles also play a huge part here. Maybe you were the hero, the one who kept everything together and made the family look good on the outside. Maybe you were the lost child who learned to make yourself invisible to avoid drawing negative attention. Maybe you were the caretaker who absorbed everyone else's emotional pain so that they didn't have to carry it. None of these roles are wrong. The problem is when they become rigid, when you are so locked into that role that you can't step outside of it even when it's costing you everything. That third circle on the outside is the world you grew up in, culture, religion, community. These all shaped what you were told love looks like, what you were told women do, what you were told good means. And as I said in the last section, most of these messages for women pointed in the same direction. Put everyone else first. Your needs come last. Your discomfort is selfish. Your boundaries are unkind. All three of these layers interact and reinforce each other. And by the time most women are adults, the codependent patterns they carry don't feel like patterns at all. They feel like personality. They feel like this is who you are. That's the part that makes this so hard. You're not fighting a choice that you're consciously making. You're fighting an automatic, deeply wired set of responses that feel as natural as breathing. Okay, this is the section I really wanted to get into because everything we've talked about so far applies broadly. But the women in this audience are not dealing with a generic experience. Many of them have been in relationships where the codependent patterns they already carried are not just present, they were actively identified, targeted, and exploited. And I think that distinction matters enormously. Narcissistic and emotionally abusive individuals are often extraordinarily skilled at locating the specific vulnerabilities of the people around them. They sense the person who needs to be needed. They sense the person who defines their worth through usefulness. They sense the person whose nervous system was calibrated in childhood to manage other people's emotions. And then they move in. In the early stages of these relationships, the codependent pattern gets activated in the most intoxicating way. You feel needed. You feel special. You feel like your care and your attention are finally being received by someone who really appreciates it. That kind of connection feels intense. It feels like purpose. But over time, something shifts. What started as feeling needed becomes required to manage the other person's emotional world at all times. The caregiving that once felt like love becomes the price of peace. The hypervigilance, that constant scanning for what mood they're in, whether they're upset, whether something is about to go wrong, becomes your baseline way of existing. And here's a specific mechanism I want you to understand because I don't think it gets named clearly enough. Abusive dynamics don't just exploit codependent patterns, they deepen them. The gaslighting teaches you to stop trusting your internal experience and rely on external information instead. The intermittent reinforcement, the warm one day, cold the next, It keeps your nervous system constantly scanning for approval, the criticism and dismissal train that you believe that your needs are too much. Then the isolation cuts you off from anyone who might reflect your reality back to you. Every one of those tactics push you in the same direction, away from yourself and toward them, away from internal focus and toward external focus, away from your own instincts and toward their version of reality. By the time many women recognize what has happened, they cannot find themselves. Not because they didn't have a self, but because of years of deliberate, systematic conditioning training them to stop consulting it. The codependency that developed in childhood made the woman more susceptible to this kind of relationship. The abusive relationship then took those patterns and made them deeper, more automatic, harder to see clearly from the inside. That's not a personal failure. That is what abuse does when it encounters an already vulnerable nervous system. And this is why healing from these relationships requires something way more specific than just general self-help advice. Because you're not just healing from codependent patterns. You are healing codependent patterns that were deliberately exploited and amplified by someone who benefited from your self-abandonment. That requires acknowledgement. That requires anger in the right doses. That requires a level of compassion for yourself that is very hard to access when you have been trained to believe that your needs are the problem. I want to try to make this concrete because I think women hear the word codependency and picture something dramatic. But most of the time, it looks completely ordinary. It looks just like a Tuesday. It looks like you spending the entire dinner anxious because someone across the table seems irritated. Not because they've said anything, not because anything has actually happened, but your entire nervous system is dialed into whether he is okay, and your own experience of the evening is basically non-existent. It looks like mentally rehearsing a conversation for 3 days in advance, thinking through every possible way he could respond, trying to pre-solve every potential point of conflict so that the thing that you actually need to say lands without disruption. It looks like being so focused on managing his reaction that you lose track of what you actually wanted to say in the first place. It looks like saying, "Oh, it's okay," when it is absolutely not okay. Not even realizing that you're doing it. Your mouth says it's fine because your body has been programmed to smooth things over before they become a problem. It looks like him forgetting something that matters to you, something that you told him, something that you asked for, something important, and somehow you ending up comforting him about how bad he feels for forgetting. Women recognize this one immediately. You came into a conversation with a legitimate need and you left managing his guilt about not meeting it. It looks like feeling physical panic, actual anxiety in your body when someone withdraws emotionally, even if they're just tired, even if it has nothing to do with you. Your nervous system reads emotional distance as danger and immediately mobilizes to close the gap, regardless of whether that's actually your job. It looks like trying to earn love through usefulness, making yourself indispensable because on some level you don't quite believe that you would be wanted if you weren't also needed. This one is quiet and it runs deep. It looks like being asked, "What do you want to do tonight?" and genuinely not knowing. Not because you have no preferences, but because you have spent so long organizing your choices around what would work for everyone else that you've lost access to the part of you that just wants things for itself. And maybe the hardest one, it looks like confusing emotional exhaustion for love. Thinking, if I am this consumed, if I am this invested, if I am this depleted, it must mean this is the most real thing I have ever felt. It must mean I love him. But sometimes exhaustion is just exhaustion. Sometimes your nervous system is in survival mode, and survival mode does not always equal love. One of the most important questions you can start asking yourself is this: Where am I in my own life? Not in his life, not in the household, not in the role I play for everyone else. Where am I? Because if the honest answer is I have no idea, that is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. And now I want to spend a few minutes on something that I think is really important for understanding why this is so hard to change, even when you understand it completely intellectually. The patterns we're talking about are not just thought patterns. They are nervous system patterns. And your nervous system does not update based on intellectual awareness alone. Here's the basic picture. When you are in an entangled, overfunctioning dynamic, when you are constantly monitoring someone else's moods, trying to prevent conflict, managing the emotional temperament of your environment, your sympathetic nervous system is running hot. It is pumping stress hormones. It is in a low-grade fight or flight state almost constantly. And what that produces is reactivity, not thoughtful, considered responses, reflexive, automatic reactions designed to reduce the perceived threat as quickly as possible. Appeasing, apologizing, over-explaining, going along with things that you don't agree with. These are nervous system responses, not conscious choices. The clinical framework I encountered in the training described it as the difference between a hot water heater and a calm lake. Your sympathetic nervous system is the hot water heater. It runs hot, it protects you. But when it's overworking, it keeps you in reactive mode indefinitely. Your parasympathetic nervous system is like the calm lake. It's designed to counter all of that and bring you back to a regulated baseline. The goal of healing is learning to activate the calm lake, to move from reactive to responsive, not because you stop feeling things, but because you create enough space between the stimulus and your reaction to actually choose how you respond. And that space is where self-connection lives. That space is where you can hear your own internal voice instead of just managing the threat in front of you. Things that activate the parasympathetic system, that move you from the hot water heater to the calm lake, are not complicated. Intentional slow breathing, mindfulness, grounding, meditation, even just deliberately slowing your pace. These are not soft extras. They are neurological tools that literally change what is available to you in a difficult moment. And in the context of narcissistic abuse, this matters even more because years inside those dynamics can leave your nervous system calibrated to a chronic threat state. The hypervigilance doesn't turn off just because the relationship ends. Your body is still running the old programming. Healing the nervous system takes time. It takes repetition. It takes practice in situations that feel safe. But it is possible. And understanding that this is a neurological process, not a willpower problem, not a character flaw, changes how you relate to yourself while you're in it. Okay, so now let's talk about what actually helps. Not in a vague, inspirational quote kind of a way, in a specific, usable, what I actually do with this kind of way. I want to organize this around 4 areas that I think kind of build on each other. And I want to say up front, none of this requires leaving a relationship first. None of this requires having it all figured out. You start where you are, and you start small. So tool number 1, noticing the external focus. The first move is simply noticing. Before you can change any pattern, you have to be able to see it operating in real time. So start paying attention to how often your attention leaves yourself. How often do you check in with what he's feeling before you check in with what you're feeling? How often do you make a decision based on what would cause the least conflict rather than what you actually want? How often do you realize mid-conversation that you have completely lost track of your own point because you got pulled into managing his reaction? Just notice. You don't have to do anything with it yet. Just track it. Oh, there I go. I just lost myself again. That moment of noticing is the pattern becoming conscious instead of automatic. And conscious patterns can be interrupted. Automatic ones just keep running. Tool number 2, listening to yourself in 4 areas. This one comes directly from the clinical work that I was studying, and I find it genuinely useful. When you are trying to figure out what you actually need, before you set a limit with someone, before you make a decision, before you respond to something that triggered you, check in with yourself across these 4 areas. First is your mind. What are my thoughts telling me? What story am I running? Is it, I have to fix this, or I'll make it worse if I say something? Then check in with your body. What does my body know that my mind is arguing with? Is there tension, dread, a knot in my stomach? Your body often knows the truth before your mind is ready to hear it. Then check in with your feelings. What am I actually feeling underneath whatever I'm doing to manage the situation? Not what I think I should feel, not what's convenient. What is actually here? And then check in with your spirit, or however you relate to that word. What feels aligned with my deepest sense for what's right for me? What would the healthiest version of myself do here? These 4 check-ins take 30 seconds, but they can completely change what becomes available to you before you respond, because you are giving yourself information instead of just reacting. Tool number 3, the I statement and saying it once. This is one of the most underused tools in boundary setting, and codependent women in particular tend to avoid it because stating a clear need feels terrifying when you've been trained to make yourself small. The I statement is simple in structure. I feel, I need, I would like. It keeps the focus on your own experience rather than making an accusation about the other person. But here's the part that matters as much as the structure. Say it once, clearly, without over-explaining, without pre-apologizing, without softening it so much that the actual content disappears. I need 1 evening a week to myself. Not, I know you need me and I totally understand why, and I feel terrible about asking, but I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately and I was wondering if maybe I could possibly work it out for me to have a little bit of time. The over-explaining is not kindness. It is anxiety doing the work of making yourself smaller before someone else can do it for you. And it actually makes the limit less clear, not more. Say it once, let it land. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to convince anyone. You are allowed to have needs that don't require justification. I need 1 evening a week to myself. Tool number 4, know when to stop and then stop. This is the hardest one for codependent women, and it goes against every instinct that has been trained into them. When you have said what you needed to say, when you have set a limit, made a request, shared your truth, and the other person pushes back, escalates, goes cold, or starts dismantling what you said, the trained response is to keep going, to explain better, to defend yourself, to prove the limit is reasonable, to manage their reactions so that they come around. The new skill is different. The new skill is recognizing that their response to your limit is not new information about whether your limit is valid. It is simply a response, and you are allowed to let it be a response without engaging with all of it. In situations where the other person is emotionally safe, you can say, I hear you, I still need this, and then stop. In situations where someone is not safe, where the pushback is not a reasonable conversation, but pressure, manipulation, or punishment, recognizing that you don't have to win the argument. You don't have to make them agree. Your limit exists whether they accept it or not. The clinical phrase I love for this is be aware of when to stop and then stop. They're separated because they're 2 different skills. You can know when it's time to stop and still keep going because the anxiety is unbearable. Learning to actually stop, to let the discomfort be there without rescuing them from it or rescuing yourself by over-explaining is its own specific practice. And finally, tool number 5, allow someone else's consequences to be theirs. This one is specific to overfunctioning, and it is brutal for women who have spent years managing everyone else's outcomes. If you always scramble the eggs, the person never learns to scramble the eggs. If you always fill out the forms, the person never learns what it takes to fill out the forms. This is not a metaphor about eggs. This is about how overfunctioning, however loving its intention, actually limits the growth of the other person. And more importantly, it limits yours. Because every time you step in and rescue someone from their own consequences, you are also practicing the belief that they cannot handle their own life without you. You are reinforcing the dynamic. You are making yourself indispensable in a way that is exhausting you. Letting someone experience a consequence, not cruelly, not with satisfaction, but simply allowing what naturally follows their choices to follow their choices is one of the most loving things you can do. And it's one of the most terrifying things for a codependent woman to sit with. Start small. Let something small be uncomfortable without fixing it. Notice the anxiety. Breathe through it. And notice that the world didn't end and that you're still okay. Pattern breaking is not one big dramatic moment. It is 1,000 small moments of choosing to stay with yourself instead of leaving yourself to manage someone else. Every single one of those moments counts. And now I want to talk about what healthy love actually feels like. I think it will surprise you because I think it matters specifically for women who have come out of narcissistic or emotionally abusive relationships. There is a very common experience where a woman leaves, does real work on herself, and then meets someone who is genuinely kind and emotionally available and feels almost nothing. No rush, no electric charge, no walking on eggshells that somehow felt like passion, just steadiness, calm, someone who says they'll be there and is actually there. And the confused, scared part of her brain goes, something must be wrong. This can't be love. Love is supposed to feel like something. And I want to say clearly, that response is not a sign that healthy love is the wrong fit for you. It is a sign that your nervous system was calibrated to interpret chaos as intimacy and calm as absence. That is not a truth about love. That is a learned association, and it can be unlearned. Healthy love does not require your self-erasure. It does not require you to monitor every emotional shift and adjust yourself accordingly. It does not have you walking on eggshells. It does not come with a particular terror of wondering what version of someone you're going to get today. Healthy love has room for two full people with needs and limits and opinions and bad days and desires that don't always align, and a relationship that can hold all of that without one person disappearing into it. At first, that might feel uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, because it's unfamiliar, because you have never experienced something that didn't require self-abandonment to maintain. Try giving it time. Stay with the calm. Let your nervous system experience what safe actually feels like over and over again until it starts to trust it. That's not settling. That is the whole point. I want to be honest with you about this work actually involves, because there is a version of this conversation that oversimplifies it, that makes it sound like once you understand the pattern, you'll just stop doing it. And that's not what happens. Understanding the pattern intellectually is the beginning. It is necessary and it is valuable. But you can fully understand what codependency is, why it formed, where it lives in your nervous system, and still find yourself doing it automatically the next time someone you love seems upset. Because this is not just a thought pattern, it's a nervous system wiring. It is relational conditioning. It is identity, the sense of who you are that was built around these ways of operating. And you don't change those things by reading about them. You change them by practicing something differently, repeatedly, in real situations, often while you feel the full discomfort of how unfamiliar different feels. And that is so much easier to do with support, with someone guiding you, with a community of people who understand what you've been navigating because they are navigating it too. That is the core of why I created this community, of why I created my program, because I kept watching women come to this content to understand everything that I was describing, to nod along with it, and then go home and find themselves doing the same thing. Not because they weren't smart enough or committed enough, because awareness alone doesn't restructure a nervous system. Support does, practice does, community does. If you're interested, the program is 12 weeks of doing this work. Not just understanding it, with structure, with a group of women who get it, with tools that actually translate into your daily life. If that's where you are, information is in my socials. Reach out, ask questions. There's no pressure, just an open door. Now, if you have spent years overfunctioning for everyone around you, if you have been praised for how much you can absorb, how little you ask for, how reliably you show up for everyone else, I want to say something directly to you. The discomfort you feel when you start choosing yourself is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that the pattern is being interrupted. An interruption feels unfamiliar before it feels freeing. You are allowed to care deeply about people without disappearing inside them. You are allowed to love people without abandoning yourself in the process. You are allowed to have needs that matter just as much as anyone else's. And you are allowed to exist fully with opinions and limits, with rest, and all of the things that you have been quietly setting aside for years. And if other people in your life react to you reclaiming yourself with confusion or frustration or accusation, oh, you've changed, you've become selfish, you're not the person I knew, I want you to hear this. Good. You are supposed to change. That is the whole point. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, not just someone who's already in this community, someone still in the middle of it who doesn't have words yet for what they're carrying. And if you haven't yet, please leave a review wherever you listen. It genuinely helps more women find these conversations. And there are so many women quietly living these patterns right now who would be changed by having them named. Until next time, keep breaking every pattern that taught you that your worth only existed in what you could do for everyone else.